Our text for today is read from the 5th chapter of the letter of St. Paul to the churches of Galatians, in other words, chapter 5, beginning with verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulation, wrath, strife, sedition, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revellings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. The works of the flesh are manifest. That means that they're very obvious and very clearly seen by those who want to know. Adultery is one. Well, we may say that this is not a basic problem in the church today. Well, I question whether that is true on any level, but do not forget that Jesus said divorce and remarriage among Christians is adultery. Now, in the Laodicean church of today, with its situation ethics and its new morality, this is furiously argued. But it cannot be legitimately argued in the light of what the apostle has just said. The righteousness of the law of God demands that we love our neighbor as ourselves. Do you want your neighbor running off with your wife or husband? Do you want him to break up your home and leave your children without a wholesome two-parent atmosphere to grow up in? In every broken home, there is one partner who has a broken heart. He has been betrayed, or she, that person, by the person who promised to live throughout the best and the worst of times and to stick so close, so loyally, that only death would part them. Nothing is more destructive to the person and the children, no matter what psychologists these henchmen of the devil try to convince you of. It's only utter, ruthless selfishness of people that causes broken homes, divorce, and remarriage. So do not add the sin of lying to your sin of immorality. Divorce is an unjust, and as to the true law, and the only law that really matters, an illegal act. Therefore, anyone who marries someone else's wife or husband is guilty of hatred toward his neighbor, which is axiomatically hatred toward God. Remember that you can only love God if you love your neighbor. And if you love God, you will love your neighbor. When you marry a divorced person, you are guilty of lying to God and breaking that solemn vow that you made before Him. You are guilty of stealing, the spirit of murder, committing adultery, coveting your neighbor's wife or husband, bearing false witness, and every other commandment. You may say that you've not broken the Sabbath commandment by divorcing and remarrying. Well, if you understood the New Testament Sabbath in the book of Hebrews, you would know that you have broken that too. So lie to yourself and gather to yourself other liars if you wish to do so, but be sure to know how clear it is to those who are interested in truth that adultery is a work of the flesh, and divorce and remarriage is adultery. You may deny it even so, but I do not wish to argue with you about it. It is, and you and I both know it. And if there are any who in doubt about it, they will know it too when the day of judgment arrives. But what about two people who were both the victim of a divorce, neither one of which wanted it and each of which was abandoned by their mate? Are they wrong if they marry each other? The Bible makes provision for that in 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter. But be careful how you apply that teaching if you want to be right in the sight of God. In my 32 years in the ministry, I have seen a few, but only a few, to whom it legitimately applied. Fornication is another sin that is not sanctified because of its commonness in the modern church. Now, uncleanness can either be spiritual or physical filth. It literally means to be unpruned or unpurged, and it certainly comprehends those who live in filth out of indifference and laziness, men who let their beards grow wild and do not cut their hair because they're undisciplined, indifferent, and rebellious, but it goes much further. It's talking about people who do not keep themselves in a presentable condition morally, spiritually, or physically. Lasciviousness can mean sexual lust, but since in this case it does not mean fornication or adultery, this is talking about other lusts, the lusts of the eyes and the pride of life. It identifies one who is driven by his desires and not by moral and spiritual principles. It identifies what engulfs us today like deep forests around a small meadow. It's condemning hedonism and materialism. Idolatry is also prominent in our society, and men have virtually everything in their lives ahead of God in terms of priority and importance. It may be Sunday football, golf, daytime serials, physical fitness, cars, clothes, business, you name it. When our lives become so full of things that there is no time for God, more than that, when something or someone, anything or anyone takes first place from God, we are idolaters. Godly people, both now and in the past, are those who have refused to let anything come between them and the God they love. You will not rob them of their time alone in prayer and their love of the Scriptures. It is this attitude that God is looking for when He says, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall love the Lord your God with all your mind and with all your strength and with all your soul." If that is not true of you, then you are an idolater, and it is no one's fault but your own. So don't start blaming your family, your job, your health, and so on. We find time for the things and the ones we consider to be important, and we find the most time for the one who is the most important. If you try to deny that, you are only adding lying to the sin of idolatry. Witchcraft is both an interesting word and concept. It's the Greek word pharmakia, and it means medication. It also means magic and sorcery. So what does it mean to us? Witchcraft condemns all mind-altering experiences and tactics, whether it be chanting, gibberish, hyperventilation exercises, drugs and potions that induce these altered states of consciousness, and all other practices that counterfeit the supernatural with mental and emotional abnormalities. Without question, this condemns charismatic humanism with its faith-healing frauds, emotionally warped manifestations like the modern concept of speaking with tongues, claimed visions and revelations, so-called and falsely so-called out-of-body experiences. Certainly these false demonstrations of spiritism and black magic are included here, but it goes far beyond that. It includes psychology and psychiatry, the positive thinking cult, mind over matter, the mind manipulation of the church growth principle, evangelism explosion, and every other counterfeit to true spirituality. Hatred is another work of the flesh, which passes unnoticed too often. We think of hatred in classic terms, but when we do that, we miss the biblical meaning almost completely. In the Bible, hatred is to think evil of someone, to wish them ill, to be indifferent to their needs, and to push them aside in the quest of getting our own way. Not long ago, and in a church setting I might add, I heard a daughter say to her mother, "Sometimes I think you hate me." "Sweetie, I don't hate you," the mother replied. "I just don't have time for you." What this mother did not realize is that she was giving a very accurate description of hatred from the biblical point of view. It was this very meaning that Jesus attached to the word when he said that no one could become a disciple of his unless he learned to hate mother, father, wife, children, and possessions. What did Jesus say? He said that if there's anything in this world that is more important to us than doing the will of God, we cannot be his disciples. This is not describing something bad, obviously, but it does give us insight into the meaning of hatred. It means to set lightly by, to little regard, to have no interest in when we should be interested, and to push people aside in order to gain our own objectives. St. John put it about as succinctly as you can put it when he said that those who do not love their brothers hate them, and that those who do not love their brothers hate God. Love has many faces, and this is not calling upon us to join forces with the mindless nonsense in the church today that calls upon us never to be critical of anyone or anything, but is calling upon us to have the proper attitude toward our brother, even if it's a disciplinary one, for his good. I, for example, get very straight with the premillennialists in pointing out their error, because this Jewish heresy is perverting the doctrine of the church, corrupting the gospel, demeaning Christ and his body, and misleading people by the millions. This is certainly not good for the one who holds to it. I love him. I will drive him away from it if I can, just as I would a cow from a poisoned water hole, and with a stick, if necessary. I wish to drive false prophets out of the church for the same reason you want to drive child molesters and rapists out of your community. The well-being of the family depends on it. And then there's variance. What is variance? And how does it differ from strife? Or does it differ? It does, and we will try to point out the difference. Here, variance is the Greek word eros, and it means wrangling, arguing, and contentiousness. It could be used in some cases to mean strife, but not here, since strife is identified as a separate vice in this case. The emphasis in this instance is on contentiousness. One's not supposed to be hard to get along with. There are some people with whom you simply cannot be at peace. In the ministry, I've known a few such people over the years. It matters not what the issue is. If you get into close quarters with them, it will not be long before they'll be out of sorts with you about something, and then out of sorts with the church and the faith as well. Then they come back, appearing to have changed, only to have the whole cycle start over again. This word is used here as the antithesis of peace and being a peacemaker. Emulation is the Greek word zelos, and it means heat, and it also means zeal in an unfavorable sense, and it can mean envy. It means to be ardent and worked up. It's talking about emotional, angry people who are resentful of the attention that anyone else is getting. Now you can spot these people very quickly. If anyone is recognized for anything, this person immediately twists the situation to make it negative. Their motives are bad. They have politicked their way into the limelight. They just want attention, and on and on. Always this person is flippant to the point of anger, lacking in manners and restraint, and overbearing with those around them who may not want to hear it. Sedition is the Greek word dikostasia. It means disunion, dissension, and division. This describes a person who cannot stand to see everything going well and everyone getting along. You know these people. You can say to them, boy, everything seems to be going so well these days, and their answer will be, well, that may be what you think, but I see lots of problems. They're not happy unless the pot is stirring and people are divided into factions. They have no desire to get along with everyone around them, and they feel defeated if others are getting along. They thrive on friction, faction, and trouble. Now, sometimes we think of heresies as an inadvertent spiritual problem that is brought on by those who mean well but do not understand truth. This is not the case. Heresies are identified here as a work of the flesh. It may be that those who are guilty of heresy do not understand, but there is something to keep in mind about that. They know that they do not understand, and they do not care. They're more interested in their tradition or their point of view and the thing they built their reputation upon than they are in finding out the truth. A heretic does not want to know the truth if it means that he has to admit that he's been wrong and change his message. He's not interested in being right. He wants to win, and win at all costs. He's perfectly willing to be wrong if that's the cost of being able to convince his audience that he's right. There's no better example of this in all the world than premillennialism and the premillennialists. I was raised in that world. I know that they're wrong. As a child, I could see the theological and biblical flaws in our doctrine. There was never a time in my life when I was sure we were right. It was evident to me as a preteen that we were preaching two gospels, two peoples of God, two kingdoms of God, and many things like bringing back animal sacrifices and Christ coming and reigning on this earth from the temple in Jerusalem that were not only unbiblical, but at odds with the basics of the gospel of salvation and the new birth. I know many premillennialists in my own family and in churches that I've grown up in and around. They had an absolute fear, just like the Pharisees, of finding out that they were wrong. They would do anything, even to the defying and distorting of the Bible, which they do on a common basis, to keep from admitting that they have been themselves misled and are misleading others. These are heretics on this subject, and they know it, and in the day of Christ, everyone will know it. These are not innocent, ignorant, excusable things. They are heady, self-righteous, and self-identifying things. Envy hardly merits a time-consuming explanation because everyone knows what it is. But in Christian circles, the same cannot be said of murderers. I do not believe that this passage is making reference to classic murders where someone goes out and kills another person physically, although, of course, one could not call it out. But this is talking to the church and the religious world, and it's dealing with the subject that Jesus raised when he said that he who is angry at his brother without a just cause is a murderer. In the Galatian church, St. Paul is pointing the finger at those who are deliberately assassinating him and his character in order to gain their objectives. We'll get more into that in a bit. Why did Cain kill Abel? Because Abel was standing in his way and keeping him from being able to promote his religious humanism the way he wanted to. Abel was keeping Cain from getting what he wanted. James takes up this theme in the church on the spiritual plane when he says to the church, "From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts, that war in your members? Ye lust, and ye have not, and ye kill, and ye desire to have, and ye cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet you have not, because you ask not. you ask and you receive not, because you ask it amiss, to consume it upon your own lusts. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. Do you think that the Scripture saith in vain, the Spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy? But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted, and mourn, and weep, and let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of God, and he will lift you up. If you do not know that St. James is talking to the church about sanctification, then you're out of touch with James's message. Drunkenness is another work of the flesh that has wider application than we have wanted to give it. It's a term that is not applied by the Bible to drinking wine alone. In 1 Corinthians 11:21, St. Paul applies it to excessive food, and in a particular context. For in eating, every one taketh before other his own supper, and one is hungry, and another is drunken. The guilty people involved are only interested in their own fulfillment and pleasure. They let this take precedence over the needs of others and the clear demands of Christian discipleship. Any activity that falls into that category is drunkenness, which means, I guess, that there are a high percentage of drunks in today's fundamental and evangelical church. In our capitalistic society, we have come to the conclusion that it is all right for one Christian to have far more than he needs, while his brethren around him are doing without. We justify this on the moral grounds that we know capitalism is a godly form of economy. This is another